Have you ever sat down for an exam? You read the first question and your mind just goes blank. You know you studied, you remember spending hours on it, but none of it is there anymore. And when that keeps happening, it doesn't just cost you marks, it builds that awful cycle of panic, disappointment, and another grade you don't even want to talk about. Well, I've been a straight A student my whole life, and in this video I'll show you 3 simple steps you can try to actually make the information stick until test day. So when you walk into your next test, you can recall the answers, stop feeling like all your effort was wasted, and finally get better grades. Step number 1 is scope. It's one of the most misunderstood parts of studying. You could spend hours rereading your notes and highlighting everything. But if what you memorize doesn't actually align with what will be on the test, you'll forget most of it anyway. That's because knowing what matters determines what your brain should focus on remembering. The purpose of this step is to decide exactly what to memorize and nothing more. If you don't do this, you end up trying to absorb everything your teacher said in class or everything that's in your textbook. And there's simply too much. Imagine you're told there'll be a quiz and 3 definitions in the Oxford Dictionary. And for some reason, you decide to try and memorize the entire dictionary for this. Well, let me tell you something, you probably remember none of the 3 you actually needed. This happens because most students start memorizing without first asking what questions they're preparing for. So the real problem isn't how smart you are, it's that you never narrowed down your target. And you just can't memorize well when everything feels important. That's why guessing what questions you're gonna get has to happen before memorizing anything. So step 1 is this. Before you start memorizing, first lock in what the test is likely to ask. Then ask yourself, what chapter or topic is this test actually on? You'll find that your teacher probably told you in class. You could ask a friend. Then, what type of questions keep showing up in your classwork or textbook? Where are the answers to those questions? Look for them in your notes. Look for patterns and find the different types of questions that you see repetitively. These are very likely to be tested. Once your notes are marked with what's actually worth learning, you're ready to move on to the next step, understanding what you study. This is where memorizing actually becomes possible. In this step, we separate understanding from just recognizing information. Without real understanding, you will think you're prepared, but your answers will fall apart the moment a question changes. But when this is done properly, memorizing becomes easier and your answers become flexible. You probably think that listening in class, copying down notes and getting answers right means that you understood the topic. That feels true, so you move straight to memorizing once the date gets close. But the real questions here are, could you teach this to a child? Could you still answer if the question changed slightly? Most people assume that memorizing first is enough. But when you sit down for the exam, something unexpected happens. You'll find yourself remembering bits and pieces, but you can't connect them together to form a complete answer. And if a question changes a little, you're stuck, because you only memorized the exact wording. That's why understanding has to come before memorizing. If ever what the teacher explained in class wasn't enough, you can type in your chapter name and your exam board on YouTube and watch a basic explanation on the topic. Then we go one step further by looking for videos that explain the specific questions we collected earlier. You have to look for tutorials for the past paper questions of that chapter. Once you're 90% confident, you're ready to move on to the most crucial step of this process, using proven methods to memorize. And if you get this wrong, all the studying you've done so far might go to waste. This step is where you finally turn understanding into something you can actually remember for the exam. And while everyone studies differently, certain methods work better than others. The reason this matters is simple. Even if you understand a topic, how you memorize it can completely change your results. So this is worth paying attention to. Most students make this mistake. They spend their study session convincing themselves to start, highlighting notes, rereading them 2 to 3 times, looking over questions they did in class, but very little sticks. Now compare that with what the smart kids do. Instead of trying to absorb information, they force their brain to produce it. This might sound uncomfortable at first, because it feels harder, but this discomfort is exactly what makes it work. When you try to remember something without looking, your brain starts making connections. So the real issue isn't effort, it's that most people use methods that don't require the brain to actually think. You can do this in 3 simple ways. Brain dumping everything you remember on a sheet of paper, teaching the topic to someone or even an imaginary person, answering practice questions, flipping your notes and trying to recall it in your head, and then checking the answers. You repeat this process until you can remember the majority of the content. So the takeaway for this step is simple. Your best bet to remember the maximum is to try and get the information out instead of trying to push it in. Now, I mentioned earlier that understanding your topic can be extremely powerful, but there's something else I've started doing recently that's had an even bigger impact on my grades. So check out this video right here where I'll show you what it is and how you can use it to increase your chances of getting better grades.